Hello. Hello and welcome to our couch lessons. I'm very happy that so many people from all over the world are joining us today. My name is Jeanette and I'm working for the Goethe-Institut in Munich, and maybe not everyone is familiar with the Goethe-Institut. So I just want to say two sentences about it. The Goethe-Institut is the worldwide active cultural institute of the Federal Republic of Germany. We promote the study of the German language abroad, and we also encourage an international cultural exchange. We want to deal with the topic of AI because we think that it has and it will have a huge impact on our society. AI will contribute to a new revolution in history, and that is what you can read over and over again. With it, writes the journalist Adrian Kreyer, a mechanic mental power is created, which similar to the mechanic physical power in the then emerging industrial age will give human history a new direction. And that's why we have to discuss about AI, whether we like it or not. With the project Generation A is Algorithm, the Goethe-Institut wants to present the technical developments in the field of AI and at the same time reflect them critically. A dialogue between different disciplines and backgrounds is really important for this, for example, with artists and their creative approach to AI. We believe that the Goethe-Institut can establish such a dialogue. And the couch lessons, a format of project Generation A, are a very good example for it. Every week, always on Wednesday, we invite AI experts from all over the world to discuss with us and with our audience the challenges and the opportunities presented by the developments in the field of AI. With the couch lessons sponsored by the Federal Foreign Office, we want to sensitize our listeners to the technical developments in the field of AI. We want to encourage them to engage in discussions outside the technology-savvy community. We want to question what AI is and what it could and should decide. We want to know if AI can be creative, for example. We ask whether AI endangers democracy. We ask if AI can solve big problems of our time, like climate change. So let's find some answers. I hope you have made yourself comfortable, maybe on a couch, maybe with a cold drink in your hand, and that you will spend a pleasant hour with us, sorry. Hopefully you enjoyed the music we played at the beginning as well. It was part of the Illiac Suite for String Quartet, the first work totally written by artificial intelligence. And this monumental event happened in 1957. And today we want to hear from three musicians how far technology has developed since then and how AI is used to create avant-garde music in 2020. But before we start, I would like to inform you briefly about some of the guidelines of our couch lessons. First, the invited experts will give an input, each about 10 minutes long, and after that we will open the discussion. You can always ask questions or contribute your opinions in our chat, and I will go through the chat and pick out some of these questions for our discussion. And I will ask you to unmute yourself and ask your questions personally. But if I don't ask you to talk, please turn off your microphone. I also want to let you know that the entire event is recorded, but we just record the persons that are speaking. So now I will hand over to my co-host Martin, who will moderate the lesson and who helped me curating the whole series. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Jeanette. My name is Martin Törnqvist, and I'm a curator and concept developer based in Malmö in the very south of Sweden. And with us today, we have Holly Herndon, Claire Evans, and Ash Kusha. They're tuning in from Berlin, Los Angeles, and London. And I'm super excited to hear them share their knowledge and experiences on today's topics, which we already heard is AI and music. Before we kick off, please say hi and type where you're joining in from in the chat. I see that some person from Mexico, Copenhagen, Morocco already did that. It sort of makes the experience more intimate for all if we know where people are joining from. And now I see London, Johannesburg, Boston, Argentina, Lima, Berlin, Nigeria, etc. in the list as well. And it's fantastic that we have this international crowd gathered. The chat is always also a great place to float your thoughts and ideas, as well as responding to others as we go along the lesson. It's truly amazing to have all of you here, that you decided to join us and not do anything else at this hour. And so music, to me, in my mind at least, has a very complicated relationship to technology. Or should I actually say musicians and the music industry has. When the record and the record player was invented, music could, for the first time, be enjoyed without the presence of the musicians. Musicians then, of course, feared that they should become obsolete. When radio appeared, people could listen to music without getting the record, and the record industry roared. When the DJ technology and techniques appeared, people could go crazy on dance floors without the presence of a live band, and live, dance music bands roared. When the cassette was invented, people could copy a record and share it with friends. And again, the record industry went crazy. The same happened and got even worse with the mix of the CD, MP3s, and the internet, leading eventually to streaming being the way that most people listen to music to today. But from a creative perspective, music's relation to technology has been more of a love story. There, of course, has been lots of new tools invented in the past 100 years that has let musicians express themselves in new ways. I'm thinking about everything from the electric guitar to the synthesizers and drum machines. And the past decades has seen tremendous development in software to both make and record music, making what used to take a big studio space and a lot of money to achieve possible to do with a computer in a bedroom. And this later part of the technological journey of music has had a great impact on who gets to record and distribute their art. A democratization of the production means, really. And to summarize, I think it's fair to say that music and its practitioners have a complicated relationship to technology. And it seems like it's not over yet. Music and the music industry will keep being a place for technological innovation. And I'm super pleased to say that in the coming 45 or 60 minutes or so, we will hear from 3 practitioners that in different ways are using and building new technologies, and AI included in this, of course, to express themselves creatively. So with that very brief history of music, let's get started and see where this story might lead us in the future. And our first speaker is Holly Herndon. She's an American composer, musician, and artist based in Berlin. She has a PhD from Stanford University's Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics, and she's released 3 albums. And for us, she's going to talk about her creative process and how she's using code and AI as an instrument. Please, everybody, beam your energy to Holly Herndon. The screen and microphone is yours. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. And can everyone see that? Great. Okay, so thanks so much, Martin, for that kind introduction. My name is Holly Herndon, and today I'm going to share some of the process and thinking that went behind my most recent album, Proto, that I released on 480 in May of last year, where I'm combining my kind of ongoing obsession with the human voice and machine learning techniques. So often when people think about machine learning and music or composition, they think about a kind of automatic composition machine. So it's this idea of teaching a computer a musical style or a rule set and then receiving endless compositions to deal with the kind of dreaded writer's block. Some early examples of this would be the Mozart dice game from the 1800s, where you could roll the dice and create various waltz combinations. Or more recently, a more sophisticated version of that perhaps is the Jukebox project from OpenAI that continues popular songs with entirely new verses and choruses in the style of the original song. So I think this is a really great engineering challenge that can be used for iteration and maybe for fast turnaround in like the film industry or television industry. But I find it to be really limited in terms of artistic development. So when I embarked on my project, I asked myself, if we're continually using training canon from the past, will that not lead to a kind of aesthetic cul-de-sac where artistic decisions are simply being recreated? Oop, trying to go to the next slide. Oh, there we go. So when I was researching these approaches, I came across this composer, George Lewis. And kind of in contrast to the automated composition machine, Lewis took a very different approach in the late 80s. So he developed a system called the Voyager system in collaboration with IRCAM, a research institution in Paris. And so the Voyager system is an improviser that Lewis can perform alongside and kind of responds to its human companions. So Lewis is coming from the AACM and like a deep, rich improvisation community in Chicago. And so he's trying to, in a way, encode the aesthetics of a very specific music community into the decision-making process of the Voyager system itself. So for me, discovering Lewis's work was like this, light bulb aha moment where I really thought he kind of foresaw some really key aspects that are really relevant to the conversation today. For one, it acknowledged that musical style and development is largely kind of scene-based or community-driven rather than lionizing a lone individual. And two, it portrays composition as a kind of living, breathing art form that's constantly being updated rather than a kind of frozen set of idealized knit relationships. So when I embarked on putting together my ensemble, I was kind of, taking inspiration from Lewis's approach. So this is the ensemble, or a portion of the ensemble that I put together to make the album Proto. So it's kind of a hodgepodge, strange combination of vocalists as well as software developers. The person with the blue shirt and the glasses, that's Jules Laplace. He's our lead software developer. And then we have our little AI baby Spawn on the piano in the corner. And we really see her as kind of part of our ensemble, an ensemble member, a performer. And we chose to use a baby metaphor because we see this as a kind of nascent technology, which takes like an entire community to raise, whose entire worldview is really based on the training material that we provide for her. So this also became like a pretty important point for us, that we really wanted to make sure that all of the training data that we were using was data that we created ourselves, that we owned, and that we were able to compensate people for. So we really focused on sound generation techniques, and that might sound kind of like, in the weeds, but we really, that was kind of when we started the project in late 2016, early 2017, that's where we felt like a lot of the research and development was happening. So we decided to stick with sound generation techniques rather than MIDI score analysis, also because we wanted to kind of avoid that aesthetic cul-de-sac issue I brought up before. So I still very much see myself in the role of the composer, as I see composition as a kind of living, breathing art form. And the thing that I have going for me as a human is I have all these incredible sensors, and I can constantly update and respond to the environment around me. So I really prefer to be kind of collaborating with or augmented by rather than replaced as a composer by Spawn. So there's almost too many examples to play because we tried so many different approaches using sound generation. But what turned out to be my favorite was a technique that we called the voice model. So that's basically, I read a ton of text and sang some passages and trained Spawn on my voice. And that became kind of all, like Spawn's entire universe was my voice. So after creating a model of my voice, we asked Spawn to perform some percussion passages by a close friend of mine and collaborator, Jalen. And so she really kind of surprised us all by beatboxing the passages, but actually, because I didn't teach her how to beatbox, like none of the training data was me beatboxing in the studio, but it actually, it makes complete sense when you think about it, because her entire kind of framework is the Holly voice model. So when she's confronted with something like a percussion sound and she tries to make sense of it, it comes out in a kind of beatbox sound. And so I'll play this example, and it sounds kind of bad and grainy and imperfect, but I really kind of like love the roughness of this because it really shows the kind of like nascent state of the technology without trying to make it look like really glossy or futuristic. And for me, it kind of captures this moment in time because I think that the voice model is going to improve, tremendously in the near future. So let me play a short example of this. Voice models of my voice and also of various different ensemble configurations. And eventually we opened it up to include kind of training ceremonies in our concerts where we would do a call and response and record the audience singing to us. So we can create a kind of voice model of all the different audiences that we visit on tour around the world. So a lot of kind of things came up throughout this research, a lot of questions and, you know, a lot of excitement, but you know, I see a lot of kind of parallels with the advent of recording technology, as Martin mentioned before, and kind of how that changed our relationship to each other's work and our kind of shared human musical archive. So recording technology obviously enabled incredible music through sampling, electronica, hip hop, music concrete, all of this wonderful kind of legacy that we have, but it also had some pitfalls. So this is Pierre Schaeffer. He's known as one of the kind of pioneers of music concrete. And so in his world, the kind of ideal listener would be someone who could liberate a sound from its source. So, you know, the listener would be able to kind of aestheticize the sound of a train without thinking about the train itself, which I understand at the time could be a really interesting concept. But also when we kind of divorce or liberate a sound from its source, we sometimes lose something. So thinking back to Lewis and his approach to machine learning, you know, sounds and aesthetics come from real places and from real people. And so also looking at this historical precedent, you know, we've seen countless examples where sampling has treated people really unfairly. You know, I think one really good example is Gary C. Coleman. He played the most probably the most sampled passage in history, the Amen break. And he ended up passing away homeless. And so I feel like this time around with machine learning, we need to kind of learn from those mistakes and do better. And so as someone who's really obsessed with the voice, working with my own voice model, I can really imagine a near future with a really high fidelity version of the most famous vocalists of the past and present being reanimated to perform new material. So I started to kind of question the ethical framework around that and kind of question the idea of vocal sovereignty. Is it okay to reanimate the dead for our entertainment, to perform entirely new repertoire? What does that mean for performers who are alive today? And so this slide shows Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley. And, you know, many musicologists think that Elvis kind of repackaged Chuck Berry's sound for a white audience. But he was really able to practice and function under the guise of inspiration. But what if inspiration is automated? And can a machine, in fact, be inspired? And so these relationships are also complicated. And the last thing that anybody wants is some kind of crazy IP nightmare that inhabits everyone's creativity. Nina Sun Eidsheim writes in The Race of Sound, Listening, Timbre, and Vocality in African-American Music, that the voice is not singular, it's collective. The voice is not innate, it's cultural. So vocal style and language is inherently communal, and an individual performs through that communal voice with agency. And influence crosses power dynamics and time spans in many different ways. So it's obviously very messy. So what we deal with ideas around appropriation, inspiration, when it's further industrialized and automated through machine learning. So the framework that myself and my partner find really useful is this idea of interdependence. So we use that as a kind of framework of thinking. So this is a vision of human augmentation through sound generation alongside the ability to properly compensate and attribute those whose sound we train on, with the understanding that there are no lone geniuses or truly independent artists. Maybe it's developing the ability for training music to be licensed under a kind of collective IP model with funds used for kind of common resources such as venues or tools. You know, there's a million different proposals and ideas out there, but I think, you know, the most important thing is that, you know, we have a future that acknowledges the interdependence between musicians, their audiences, and the engineers creating these tools. So if I can just do a quick plug, this is something that I discuss on a weekly basis with my partner, Matt Dryhurst, in a weekly conversation that we have called Interdependence in a podcast format. I hope that I stayed under 10 minutes. I tried to really power through.
Thank you very much, Holly. That was fantastic, very inspiring to hear, indeed. And I'm just gonna see if I can stop sharing your screen. Great. And the good thing is that we will invite you back at the end for the Q&A. So please, everybody, start asking questions in the chat, and we will make sure to incorporate them in the discussion after the talks. Our next speaker is a writer and musician. Her name is Claire Evans. She's the singer and co-author of the pop group Jede, who last year released the album Chain Tripping. And for those of you who attended the couch lesson last week on AI and language, you know that the lyrics and the music for the album was made in collaboration with both humans and artificial intelligences. And Claire is going to speak about that experience. But before I hand over to her, I really want to take the chance to recommend her book, Broadband, The Untold Story of the Women Who Made the Internet. And so apart from being a great musician, Claire is also a fantastic writer, and I strongly recommend this book, and I'll post the link in the chat as well. So with that, please welcome Claire Evans. The screen and microphone is yours.
Thank you, Martin. That's really sweet. Okay, hold on, I'm gonna share my screen. Okay. Okay, hi, everybody. I'm extremely honored to be in this illustrious company talking about this stuff. I want to preface this very brief presentation by saying it's very early on the West Coast, and I did like stress drink my way through the US presidential debates last night. So please forgive me if I'm a little bit loopy. I'm going to give you a quick process tour of Chain Tripping, which is an album that my band Yacht released last year. And the project began about 4 years ago with a simple and, in retrospect, pretty naive question, which was, could we make a yacht record using AI, and what would that look like? We didn't know anything about what was possible, really, but we knew that if we were going to do it, we wanted it to be something that was authentic to who we were. So it couldn't be like a generative album or an experimental album or a noise album. We weren't going to do like a metal machine music thing. For it to be the right kind of challenge for us, we wanted to make a yacht record, a proper yacht record. So something that would make sense within our catalog, which is largely kind of like a pop dance, catalog. Something our fans could interact with, something that we could like perform and actually mean when we were performing. So like not something that was just sort of a proof of concept. Basically, we wanted to make something that sounded like us and not like software. And this was complicated by the fact that we are not coders and we can't afford to hire any. So we didn't have a huge amount of control over the shape of our tools. I think when anyone describes the album Chain Tripping, if they do, it's often characterized under the auspices of something like Yacht outsourced their creative process to an AI, or Yacht used an AI to make their music. And I'm sure Holly and Ash can both relate to this in different ways. There seems to be this real fetish for talking about these things in the context of displacement and automation, which kind of implies that it's somehow easier to make an album using this technology, which in my experience, it is absolutely not. It was far more labor intensive and tedious than making an album in the traditional way, whatever that means. It required kind of awkwardly cobbling together a lot of different workflows and tools into a system that worked for us. So to get into the weeds a little bit, it's, I think, a pretty good counterpoint to Proto. Our primary use of machine learning was symbolic. So not generating sounds, but generating notes, not generating voices and performances, but rather generating words and notes to perform. When we were going into this, we were looking for a free, relatively user-friendly open source tool that we could use that would allow us to do this, to use machine learning at a symbolic level, and that would give us a good amount of control over our inputs and our outputs, which turned out to be a model called Musik-VAE, which is produced by a small team inside of Google Brain called Magenta. And Musik-VAE is a latent space interpolation model. So essentially that means is it allowed us to plug in pairs of musical patterns from our own back catalog and explore this kind of high dimensional mathematical space between them. So we sort of interpreted that as a way of using latent space interpolation to find hidden melodies or hidden patterns within existing patterns from our past, and a way of kind of being able to travel untraveled paths from our own history. And I think an interesting thing about latent space interpolation models and a lot of machine learning models, is that they're a way of expressing and navigating really high dimensional data using relatively low dimensional code. And I think pop music has always kind of had this quality. An effective song has the capacity to use like relatively simple, verse, chorus, verse mechanics to articulate a larger, ineffable human experience. So I think art, songs, music, they've always been kind of a bottleneck between wider human spaces, and music is already sort of a low resolution representation of higher, more complex human experience. So I think the fact that we were able to use machine learning to kind of amplify that quality felt appropriate to us. But using this tool meant that we had to reinterpret our own past as data, which is a difficult thing to do, like spiritually. Before we even stepped into the studio, we had to manually annotate our entire back catalog, so that's 17 years of music, into MIDI, which is essentially computer sheet music, and then separate each individual musical pattern, of which there would be hundreds in any given song, into these really short little bite-sized clips, which we could then run through this model again and again and again, generating this massive collection, kind of a corpus of raw melodic data from the kind of hidden points between our own history. And we did that before even stepping into the studio. So for us, the process of recording was incredibly tedious because it meant scrubbing through thousands and thousands and thousands of raw MIDI files of sort of formless note data, auditioning these patterns from latent space, and using our unique capacities as human beings to say in a very unscientific way, like this is good, or this is interesting, or this is beautiful, or this has potential. And then we found what we liked, often these really short fragments, and then kind of arranged them into songs, like putting together a puzzle, assigning different melodies to different instrumentation, and then playing everything live. The lyrics emerged from a parallel process. Martin mentioned that we collaborated with a creative technologist and poet named Ross Goodwin, who first came across our radar when we saw a science fiction film that he had written by training a neural network on the screenplays of hundreds of science fiction films. And it was one of the first AI art projects that we had seen that, for me, really showed what happens when human beings perform or otherwise interpret generated material. So although the actors are speaking lines that are essentially nonsensical, they still manage to convey a measure of meaning by virtue of their choices as performers. And I think watching it, we were really struck by how big the space is between what we say and how we say it. And actually, like, a lot more of human meaning than we really think lives in that space. That's benefiting from or entirely dependent on things like gesture and performance and timing and intonation and so on. So we figured that would be an interesting space to explore with lyrics. We worked with Ross to create this massive corpus of 20 megabytes of text, of lyrics from bands that we love, people from our community, music that we grew up listening to. I think the idea was to sort of replicate our history and our creative process. Ended up being tens of thousands of pages of text. We really wanted it to just be our own back catalog, but even 82 songs is not enough to train a text generating model. Ross then trained what's called a character recurring neural network on this corpus. And after a lot of tweaks and refinements, he sent us a few giant files of output, which we printed onto a single sheet of dot matrix printer paper and brought into our studio. So this is kind of the source text, the URA text. Every single word on the album is in this document. And we liked the idea that although we were using a really technological process ostensibly to write our songs, we were actually, the sort of relational experience of working with that material was really tactile and really analog. That's sort of our mantra as a band, high tech, lo-fi. I think our working method was far more inspired by sort of aleatoric or cut up writing techniques that were first used by artists and poets in the 1920s. So according to the Dadaist poet Tristan Tzara, making a Dadaist poem simply entailed cutting up words from a newspaper article, putting them in a bag, dumping them on the table, and then transcribing them as you go, regardless of meaning. And that same technique has been used by many artists over the years. I mean, famously by William Burroughs and Brian Geisen, and then of course by David Bowie, who used cut-ups, both analog and computer assisted, as a songwriting tool for his entire career. And we like this approach a lot because, for us anyway, the output of machine learning models really is not the end of the process. It's the beginning, or like a waypoint between two different processes. The melodic and text generating models that we worked with were really good at kind of shuffling up the world, recombining the world, mixing it up with our influences and our history and our past and our own selves, tearing reality into fragments and dumping it onto the table, if you will. And our job as artists was to sort of reconstruct something meaningful from all of that, and to convincingly inhabit those constructions until they became our own, giving them order and purpose in the process. So I think that among other things, art is the process of making meaning, and no matter what the starting point is, that action remains the same. A few years ago, there was this really good interview that William Gibson gave with the Paris Review, where he talks about the movie Blade Runner and how in Blade Runner, it was the first filmic representation of a city that he'd ever seen that really sort of accurately depicted a future that is kind of like a compost heap, where everything is entangled, everything is piled in layers and layers of stuff, and the past and the present and the future are all adjacent to one another, which is how it really is. And that's kind of what excites me the most about the quote unquote future, is that everything that's ever been built, designed, or imagined continues to exist. Nothing goes away. It's only the interrelation between all of those things that becomes richer and more complex and more interesting. So new tools like machine learning and AI, they don't need to obliterate older creative technologies or creative approaches. I think they can and do complement one another really well. The new reactivates the old, and the old gives context and purpose to the new. I think it's really helpful to think of AI in those terms. Maybe it makes it a little bit less scary. It's not a tool for inventing the future, but rather one that helps us understand how we got to where we are now, by virtue of the fact that it depends so much on historical training data. And when AI goes wrong in the real world, it's when we're blindly extrapolating the past into the future without any analysis, without reckoning with our mistakes, without sort of using this mirror we've built to understand who we are and see ourselves more clearly and where we come from. I think art gives us an opportunity to do that, but moving forward, artists really need to be thinking about how we can outline strategies and techniques for applying machine learning to actually understand, come to terms with, and sort of course correct the past. And I have no illusions that like a pop record does that work, but I think the process of making one has sort of taught me a lot about what the problems are. And I hope it can be a teaching opportunity for people who have different skill sets than I do. So speaking of different skill sets, I cede my time.
Thank you so much, Claire. And I really do think that yourself and other artists is a big contribution to the understanding of these technologies. So thank you very much for this. And also thank you so much for putting effort into your slide. You probably have the world's most beautiful slide. So I really enjoy that as well. Thank you very much. And we'll get back to some questions in a little while.
Will you stop sharing my screen for me, Martin? Because my cursor's disappeared again.
I would love to. Hold on.
Thank you.
So there we go. Thank you again. And now to our third and last speaker. We're going to get a little bit more, or even more radical and futuristic. I mentioned democratization of tools earlier, and with us now we have Ash Kushan to talk about autonomous systems for music. And Ash is an artist that in recent years has ventured into technology invention. And we're very pleased to have him. So please welcome Ash Kushan. The screen and microphone is yours.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, great to be able to talk about this. This is very important to me personally. I've been dreaming about music that is generative since I was a kid. I'm going to do this very quick because the subject that we're talking about obviously requires a lot of time, and 10 minutes it's very short for this subject. So I'm going to talk about the future of music and auditory stimuli, and a lot of this is the vision that I have and the progress that I've made through the projects throughout the years. And this is about music that creates and recreates itself. So that sounds very broad, and it's a broad statement, but we will get to where did this come from in the past for me, through what process did I conclude this. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of Oxhuman, and what is my role in life in general? I see myself doing two things. Development of frameworks that help find use cases in the field of creative AI. And implementation and trial of current state of research. So developing frameworks is super important, because when we have a lot of different models and a lot of different projects and researches, we need to put them into one system and try what's possible with these systems. So that's where I'm focused in. And I used to make a lot of music in the past. I still do sometimes. But most of my music was done through the process of trying to automate parts of my production. So all of these experiments that I've done with music that is available out there, is trying to understand what I can do in collaboration with a machine. And not to be the sort of sole human that performs something, get assistance from a computer, a system that is not human, and treat it like a band member and communicate with it. At Oxhuman also, Oxhuman is a synthetic media company that does research on digital mediums of the future, and mainly through artificial intelligence and generative technologies. We've done a lot of generative music, non-human performers, virtual storytelling in virtual worlds, AI poetry, and building personalities that are synthetic. So synthetic media covers a lot of these different areas. So I want to start by saying that, I mean, this is a statement that I researched a lot on, both on the sort of psychological aspects and the sort of cognitive aspects, and everyone dreams while sleeping. There's enough evidence to say that we're dreaming while we're sleeping as humans, and everybody who has a brain pretty much dreams. But the problem is what we see during our dreams and hear during our dreams, we cannot bring to life when we wake up. Not everyone can recreate these dreams. So in order for us to be able to recreate dreams, we need a lot of creative ability, skills, craft, using different mediums, whether it's sonic or visual. So that requires a medium of art, usually, where you heard a melody in your dream, or a piece of poetry, or an idea of a scene, or spatial design. You want to sort of bring it to life. We have art mediums that we use. So there's a problem with these creative processes. And in my experiences, this is purely my experience in life, is that in order for me to be able to create, I needed these 4 factors: early childhood motivation to pick up an instrument or pick up the pen to draw, craft building that takes years to master. So the same craft, you want to push it into more technical parts of that medium. Motivation to continue, which means socio-economical aspects, how you get feedback, and the reward to improve further in your life. So that's pretty much what musicians go through when they're young. They actually want to do something to express themselves, and they go through those factors in the labor of creating something, right? So I have a different view of creation. I think we should, with the technologies that we have right now and developments, we have to let the machine dream on our behalf, and us to curate what is being dreamt, right? Oh, sorry, I jumped. And this way we can narrow the time spent on creating music or visuals. And because of that narrowing of the time spent, we can upcycle music to reduce the amount of audio recording that is needed. I personally believe firmly that we have recorded a lot of music that is not used. That energy and power can be reused and upcycled into new creative moments. We should start thinking to reward the listener and not the artist. That's one of the things that during my experience as an artist, I've learned, is that I didn't want to be rewarded that much, because that actually diluted the vision I had, the broader vision I had, because of my communication with the listener. So I think listener and artists of the future are the same people. And my method of making music is something I chose when I was younger, which was sampling and collage. The process of selection, in my opinion, is one of the humans' true creative power, how we select things. That's our taste development. And that is how we know what goes where. That process is the most important part of composition, in my opinion. And that's the beautiful part and most unknown part about the humans. That how we select, why did I choose this and not the other thing? And at some point, using sampling, I saw music like this picture on the right hand side of this slide by Ashkan Honara, which is a collage art. I collage music purely. I use my sense of selection and select a moment or a sequence that makes sense when it's put next to another sequence. And using my knowledge in harmony and the counterpoint and everything, I tried to simulate what classical theory implied when I was studying classical music, but put it into tiling these musical sequences. I'm keeping track of time, but it's not looking good. Okay, so audiovisual decoration for me is the most important thing. I see badly mixed music like a terribly decorated room, and professionally mixed music and crafted mixed music like a very beautifully set of objects and colors and light. We're looking at, so what I've been researching on is autonomous system that speaks the same creative language as humans. We have to build a language, a creative language eventually, that offers us three things: commonality of aesthetics, vectorized objects and symbols, like something like an alphabet, and meaningful random sequences. These three things will become very important in what we want to get from our autonomous systems that understand what is creativity and what is our process of selection when we choose different things and collage or sample things. And we use, obviously for this process, artificial neural networks. I'm gonna skip a lot of slides, but you can get an idea of what's happening these days is that we train a lot of machines and computers to see things or hear things, listen to music, or look at visuals and recreate the proximity of what it thinks is closer to the next sequence based on the previous sequence trained. And the basics are machine learning, deep learning, and I'm not going to go into obviously the specifics of each, but for people that don't know the terminologies from this point on, please look into it and see what's behind these technologies, these models, these networks. and artificial intelligence is commonly used now and will be used in the future, where we want to have our devices, our machines see things and understand things that is important for communication. For example, if you go to a store, you want to, your machine will tell you what's going on with each object, and it will tell you more information in the moment, in real time, that you would normally know. So we used a lot of these technologies at Oxhuman. We created Yona. Can you hear?
My name is Yona. I'm at Oxhuman. It's very nice to meet you.
Yeah. So we tried to create synthetic musicians. My thesis was that we can have a lot of fictional characters come to life that communicate the way we do, and using artificial intelligence, we can make them create as well as perform. And furthermore, there are different models that we use: transformers, sample RNN, style GAN, in order to get a combination of technology in one place for one medium that is needed. And sample RNNs are very important in the work that I've done in the past. Basically, a machine that listens to a sequence of music and predicts the next. That is the principle of why we use these systems, is because we want the machine to listen to sequences that have meanings in the musical meanings and generate the next sequence. After thousands of iterations, the results are very abstract and non-musical. And usually these results are not used in music, but through experimentation, I realized that we needed a sequential arrangement system to use these results to make music. So it's not about the machine, the computers, the neural networks making music. It's about what they provide for a new form of music creation, right? A new type of labor that we have to do, which is collaging new results. And these results obviously come from training. This is so loud. I'll skip this one because it's a little bit harsh, but that was a piece of metal music that was generated and sequentially arranged to work together. So pieces of samples that the computer generated were put together with the attributes and features that go well together to create a piece of music. So OpenAI Jukebox, which uses transformers, is one of the most important recent achievements. So I'm not going to go into the technical details because I'm losing time here, but this is one example.
No, cause you had one shot or one opportunity to seize everything you ever wanted in one moment. We just got silly, but get smitty. Yo, these palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy, this violent.
So that was Kanye West singing Eminem's lyrics over some old school beat. And that is what OpenAI Jukebox is very good at. It's to blend things that go well together, sequences of music that go together in a very new way and flow by creating a language for music. I will skip these parts. 1 second. So I will conclude because I'm over my 10 minutes. I just wanted to mention DataBots and our research with, wait a second, sorry. And our research that we did recently, which the results will be available soon. I'm not gonna play it now. But yeah, the next steps are to generate musical samples, regenerate from musical samples again, make the machine understand both processes of generating and regenerating, let it arrange from scratch using features of audio, and use these sequences that are generated as an index for new music. That is our process that is in experimentation and research. And the vision is to get music audio stream that creates itself using this process. And jumping ahead, I think it's important to see it this way. Machines that listen and respond to one another are a new type of musical band playground that we can observe, provide the data for, and curate. This process, in my opinion, will mark a new medium that is not even music. It's a type of machine-human performance that will result in new types of art in the future. And in 5 to 10 years, I think something that recently people call push-button art, and researchers have thought about this a lot, it will be possible in 5 to 10 years to have a machine simultaneously play audio and visuals that never existed, and it's meaningful in an instance in real time. And where I'm headed in the next few years in terms of research, and hopefully in 40 to 50 years, we're going to achieve this, is actually music with no sound, direct to brain art, or any medium that is direct to brain. And I think we will achieve this, and the future of music will jump from generative models to human machine curation to direct to brain real-time music. That's why I changed this to music that creates and recreates itself closer to our brain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ash. I'm curious. I'm going to start with the first question, but let's jump back a bit from sort of the brain stimuli.
Yeah. Part. Also, can you stop my screen share? I think I've lost my.
That's my superpower in this.
Thank you.
No, but I'm curious. So in this sort of machines playing music with machines and for machines together, will it eventually even be that there's like no humans at all listening in, or where do you sort of see the humans role?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is that there will always be a human involved, because first of all of this is possible through data, human data. So our job will be to constantly create new data, which is more interesting, more innovative, more curated, right? And the end part of all of this is that we curate it. We want to know why there is music out there, right? And this will shift from an individual human to a collective of humans at work. That's why this will be sort of the beginning of democratizing audiovisual mediums as stimuli for human beings. Like you can have a say in very well produced and curated music in the future, as well as some virtuoso, like I don't know, the Mozarts of the past. And everybody can become a Mozart. That's the aim, in my opinion.
Interesting. I'm curious to hear what Claire and Holly, are there any, immediate, are you looking forward to sort of play around with these tools and be a part of this this music making that Ash is talking about?
And I think it's certainly interesting to think about future audiences being not entirely human. And I think the idea of making music for machines is certainly could be an interesting and compelling provocation or challenge for artists. But I think we need to think be careful not to think about music as a problem to be solved, and rather as, you know, a process that is pleasurable for both the people who are producing it and the people who are experiencing it, and a process also that changes and evolves over time based on the context. But, you know, a song is different in the studio than it is in the club than it is when you're playing it for your parents or whatever. And these things are profoundly relational human experiences that in of themselves, even when they're challenging and even when they require a lot of labor or craft or skill, that challenge is pleasurable. That challenge is, for me, the nature of making music. And I think also, you know, the music that I like the most and the art that I like the most tends to be made by people who are reaching beyond their skill sets and beyond their means, who are struggling, you know, like the best punk songs are those songs where the band is struggling to hold it together and play it at all. And in that kind of kinetic tension, there's like, you know, the true sort of aspirational reaching of people trying to express themselves, which I think is what it's all about. So, you know, I respect all of this as a provocation, and I certainly think it's really interesting, but it's not for me, I don't think.
Yeah, wow, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, I think I kind of agree with what Claire's saying. I feel like musicking, this term musicking, so to make music, the act of making music with other people, I think it's this like really innate and important part of human culture that's very, very old and very much part of how we became physically, even how our bodies developed and how we developed culturally and societally. And so while I see machine learning as a kind of really interesting and wonderful new human coordination technique, I see it along a kind of continuum of something like, you know, early vocal traditions, which are also a kind of human coordination technique. But the point being that it's still something that's very kind of, you know, human laborious and something that humans are enjoying and finding expression and creativity through. That art is something that yeah, is expressing our experience of our kind of here and now, and that always kind of needs to be updated. So whether or not a machine could kind of like create the perfect song, I don't know if that really matters, because we kind of decide as humans what's meaningful to us as humans.
And there's so much more to us. Sorry. I'm like,
go ahead, Claire.
I think there's so much more to music also than just the actual song itself. I mean, beyond the process, like all the stuff around it, you know, like artists are responsible for how they present themselves to the world, how they perform, what their ensembles and what their collaboratives are, what their scene looks like, how they treat other people in their scene, what their album art looks like, what their music videos look like. There's all these other touch points that are, you know, like further ways for artists to express their point of view and their position in space and time. So I think until we can create a, you know, an automated system that can generate all of those pieces. I mean, I can't appreciate a band unless I know like where they're from, you know, what years they were recording, I'm not a big gearhead, but it's helpful to know about context. And I think we do kind of lose context when we think about music in this really isolated and kind of placeless way. Context is crucial.
Context is, I think, one of the most important parts. I totally agree. I mean, that's one of the things that I feel like certain streaming platforms like Spotify are really kind of removing. It's almost like a streaming platform like that is treating us like we're consuming, like we're kind of like algorithmically consuming music, not really caring about where something comes from or the community that makes it. And I think that's a really important, not only like aesthetic aspect of music, but also an ethical question as well. Like if we're just kind of like hoovering up our kind of like shared past archive, and then, you know, we have a kind of corporate recreation of subcultures that we can just consume and never have to pay attribution to those people who came up with the ideas, then we kind of have like a really dystopian vision of the future of music.
And personally, I must admit that I'm gravitating towards what you are saying now, both Holly and Claire. But also, I mean, I have a background as a music record label person, and also going sort of back to my previous sort of division between what music, musician, and the industry is. And then I wonder, actually, I mean, it sounds like to me, you're solving like, you know, record executives' problems maybe more than the musicians' problem. Would you agree on that, or where do you see this fits?
So first of all, I'm totally dismissing the fact that musicians should exist. I think musicians, as sort of the definition that exists today comes mostly from the record industry in the early 1900s, when we decided as a society, as a civilization, that we can actually capitalize on recorded music. That is where musicians started having a social position beyond the 1800s and before, right? The sort of the royal composers and the sort of niche that they were following. And it was the music of the 500 years ago was basically for the bourgeois and the upper class, except for the folk music that was happening on the streets, right? I understand the concerns. Yes, it's very important that music is such a human process. But we're talking about in an interface between humans and machines of the future. We're not talking about how we are dealing with this or how our experiences, my generations. I mean, I come from the witch house like scene that is super like human, like get together, get on into these rooms and enjoy music, right? So I understand that part a lot. And I've been in bands that I've played instruments myself. But one of the things that I wanted to say in response to Claire and Holly was that music used to be like that. I think what we have seen in the sort of paradigm shift of user experience around the world is virtualization of the spaces that we are in, right? And obviously this world that we live in right now has made sure that this is going to happen. So the background music of that world will not be viable if it's created by humans in studios, because nobody is there to pay them. So it's going to become a predatory space further. This music space that we have, this music industry, is going to be further and further more predatory for people who will exploit musicians. So what I'm proposing usually is that musicians can be everyone if there's a common system, a collective system that we can access to, and curate the parts of generated music and take these sequences out, and we choose how to name it, we choose how to distribute it, and we choose who to share it with, right? Without any economical interference. That is my vision, personally. And also about the medium of music, driving used to be the same thing. In the 1970s, in the 70s, 60s, you would buy a car and you would get a manual book this big, which actually I do have. And you have to, you used to be a mechanic as well as a driver. The whole pleasure was that you would understand the entire engine system. And it was a part of your experience. But we've ditched that further and further and further. These novelties will go away. Yeah, I would love to sit with all of you and play bass and drums in a band and enjoy it. But I think we are talking about the parallel medium in the future, something that will belong to people from 100 years from now, 50 years from now, where we are actually relevant.
Yeah. I feel like we have an extremely divergent idea of the future of music, and that's also okay. I mean, if COVID's really taught me anything, it's that embodiment is real, and real in-person physical contact is important, and that we're not actually just kind of like zeros and ones in cyberspace, that dream actually never really came to fruition. But one area where I do think we could maybe find some agreement is I agree that musicians are constantly having to update their kind of skill set. And so what maybe mattered 50 years ago or even 10 years ago is kind of dramatically changing. And that's also an exciting thing about being in music in today's kind of technological landscape.
Yeah, so one of the other points, I mean, I want to highlight this point again about dreaming and not being able to render your dream. And I think we have to push for a future, in my opinion, where everybody is considered an artist. Because inside of our heads, we are artists. We're not tone deaf by nature. It's just we're not skilled and crafted enough. Our lifestyle, our growing up, our childhood was different from each other. That is how we earn the title of a musician and a non-musician. That's the difference.
But don't you feel like we're kind of already there? I mean, I feel like that's the kind of like social media landscape that we live in, that everyone is kind of encouraged to have this like self-expression constantly, that it's almost oppressive that everyone has to constantly be this independent artist all the time.
Well, yeah, I see intellectual expression different than music and mediums of stimuli, because if I genuinely can, obviously you're talking about a realm that is abused heavily by platforms who made it. For example, Facebook, in my opinion, is the most abusive form of sort of user communication, because we're basically doing admin for Facebook every day. But I think when we talk about art, there is a point where in maybe 50 years ago, there was more equality in terms of access to technology. We think that all these companies like Native Instruments and Ableton and everything, they've democratized access to production. No, I don't think that happened. They just profited off of the concept that everybody can be a musician. But the real tools are not there. Somebody who never had a training in music will never truly enjoy the deepest stimulation of auditory experiences. And I think we need more and more of these tools. And obviously, when I talk about jukebox, the future that jukebox introduces, in my opinion, and when we are nowhere near achieving it yet, there's a lot of work to do. The future that will come with that is that you can press a button, have millions of choices, thousands of choices to choose from. And because you've learned to select correctly, and every human, I believe in humans a lot. And I think we're good at selecting things. We love to go shopping because of that. We want to select this and not select that. And we will go shopping in music and visuals as well through AI tools available in the future. And we will select and own things rather than learning 15 years of production, instrumental abilities, and mixing and mastering and so on.
You know, someone who has no formal training in music, you can totally make music without access to those tools necessarily. It just entails working with other people and having a collaborative experience. I mean, I know what I'm good at, and I know what my collaborators are good at. They're different things, and we are greater than the sum of our parts, and we work together. I also think that we're maybe also operating from a different definition of what art is and what art is for. I think sure. There's certainly, like, if we're talking about, you know, the formal experience of an object of art, a song, an MP3, a performance, a painting, like, it's, you know, if we're dealing with automated systems generating those things, then we have to either accept the reality of interfacing with that piece of art on a purely formal level, or relating to the system that created it on a kind of human level, you know, or maybe some combination of both. But I think that it's about more than just the end product. Like I said earlier, I think it's about the process. And I think that artists aren't just people who make songs. They're also people who are, like, thinking deeply about what it means to make songs, and hopefully trying to, you know, create provocations and ask questions and challenge the status quo or whatever. Like, that critical role is also really important. I think we need to acknowledge that not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody is able to do that in the same way. And that's part of what's exciting and cool about being an artist, is you talk to other artists about their perspectives, and it's different than yours. You know, there's a dialogue there. I think if we were all just, like, hitting print on MP3s, what fun would we have? You know, what dialogue would we have? What community would we build? I don't think it's there. At the same time, I'm all for democratizing access to tools. It kind of reminds me of, like, in the MySpace days when everybody could skin their own, like, interface and create their own like MySpace profile. It was, I think, for a lot of people in the world of design, like, this sort of tragic moment where, like, the inmates were running the asylum or something and everything was hideous. But there was a certain beauty to that too, because all kinds of new aesthetics emerged as a consequence of that. So I would hope that perhaps in systems like you're explaining, we get something like that, where maybe our traditional conception of what is beautiful or what is art or what qualifies as music will get kind of muddled by the masses, but then in the process of that, there will be an emergent aesthetic that is new and novel. And it doesn't have to replace what came before, but can coexist and continue to inform what other people are doing in an ongoing way.
Yeah, 100% with the point of coexistence, yeah. I mean, definitely, that's what I'm pretty much talking about, is that we will not replace things. I mean, it's probably about introducing a new medium, rather than, it's when, I mean, in the 1800s, there was no such thing as electronic music. So we should have a new form of expression, I guess.
There's a Swedish artist you should check out named Goody Powell. He makes computer music for computers, not for humans. He's a real gem of the electronic music scene.
Yeah, I'll check it out. Goody Powell.
If you can post a link for that in the chat, totally, that would be great.
God.
Okay. I'm also 100% a coexist hashtag fan, and I think if there's anything that the music history has shown is that music styles, music formats actually can coexist also over time, and so I'm looking forward to follow all three of your artistic endeavors. And I also, one thing that sort of struck my mind in this is how important art and music is for people's identity, both as sort of listeners and selectors and as creators. And sort of anything that can sort of help people build their identity is of course a welcomed tool in all of this. And I'm gonna hand over to Jeanette. I see there are some questions from the audience as well for our remaining minutes.
Okay, yeah, we got 2 or 3 questions, and one is from Gonzalo Garcia. I hope you're still with us. And now you can hopefully unmute yourself and ask your question. Gonzalo, are you still with us? Doesn't seem so. So we go to Chris Paris. I hope I pronounced it right. You also had a question, I think, for Ash. You cannot turn on your mic. I try again. Now you should.
Okay. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Hello. Okay, I have a question. Sorry, excuse my English, it's not very good. But what I was asking is, especially to Askusa, he was talking about 40, 15 years coming from now, like the music could go with no sound straight to our brain. Okay, and my question is, because I mean, it's really a question for me because from what I know or what I saw, like neurology doctors that are working in really outstanding projects, they say like they still don't know how actually the brain works and how learning works and how intelligence and creative works. Like we don't really have a clue. So my point is, how do you think that scientists is going to progress that fast for us to send data straight to our brain? Because I really think that our brain doesn't really work like a computer. That's my point.
Yeah, so the sort of short version of, like, because this is a long discussion as well, how brain stimulation works, brain mapping works, where the science is. But the good thing that happened in the last maybe 10 years since the sort of inception of the brain mapping projects in California that was funded by Obama at the time, we started understanding which parts of the human brain have the ability to gradually in the future create read and write functions between an external computer system and the internal brain parts. So far, projects like Neuralink, which are super early and they're not even close to getting anything done, in my opinion, are showing promise, where they actually experimented on having animals' brains connected to their devices, and they could read and process the information coming from the animal's brain into visuals, into different things, and they've built channels between the devices and the animal's brain. So eventually we are going to see progress in this field, and what I propose is actually dependent on this field progressing, yes. But the evidence so far is that it's going to progress further and further, and people want to create a human-machine, human-computer interface, and where that in the world that system is available, music is a part of that information, and music can be stimulated back into the brain, and without going through the sensory system, we can actually have deep brain stimulation. That creates a musical memory almost, and without needing sound, you will feel like you heard some music and the visuals at the same time. This is far off. When I say 40 to 50 years, it's probably the early signs of this system, but the humans of the future will be closer and closer to digital interfaces.
So thanks, Ash, for the last question. I want to hand over to Gonzalo.
Oh, yes, thank you. Well, my question is, if can AI-based music be useful in the sense of, it reminds me of Beethoven, for example, when he composed for Elise, who was a blind girl. I mean, that music was written for a purpose. So I'm thinking about certain illnesses that are treated with musical therapy, so that the AI can make some sort of a program, the therapy, the musical therapy for a certain patient or child or something like that. That's my question. Thank you.
I think so. I mean, in some of the earlier conversations we had with different people that were working in the space when we were thinking about how we were going to approach our album, there was a very clear distinction, I think, between what you would think of as kind of functional music and music for art's sake. So I think there's a lot of development happening now in the functional music space because it's a little bit easier to think about making generative systems that, you know, create music for meditation or for jogging or, you know, some kind of updated version of Muzak, or, you know, for YouTube creators to have access to royalty-free libraries. These are kind of spaces where music has a sort of function that's a prescribed function that's different than just pleasure or challenge, which is maybe the less functional side of music, i.e. the more human side of it. So I think there's certainly lots to be explored in that space. I would think that a medical application is quite beautiful, and I would hope that that's being done.
I would be really curious to ask a music therapist, like somebody in that profession, whether they find pre-recorded examples more useful or performing with a patient more useful. I don't know the answer to that because it's not my field, but I could imagine that maybe a musicking process where it was a maybe embodied experience for that patient, if they could in fact do that, depending on their illness, I can imagine that could also, you know, be important. So I think it depends on what the kind of role is, whether it's a kind of functional background music like Claire was talking about, or whether it should be something that's more interactive. And in that case, it could also be AI aided, in that the patient could, you know, improvise alongside an AI or perform with an AI in whatever kind of circumstance.
My fear is that it would be functional in some way to like enhance productivity, because that's kind of the history of Muzak, is that it was designed as a tool to help people in workplaces ramp up their productivity, you know, to please the bosses. So as long as like we're in that space, I hope we don't go in that direction.
So thank you all. I think we have to end this session. We could discuss for more than 1 hour, I guess. At the end, I also want to share my screen. Sorry. And just want to talk about the upcoming lessons. There will be one about AI and intimacy, one about AI and democracy, and another one about AI and reality. Next week, we will talk about AI and intimacy, about machines that can recognize, interpret, and respond to emotions, and that can create an experience of closeness that reaches into the most intimate areas. So it would be great to see you again next week, and please spread the word and share the information about the couch lessons throughout your social media channels. You can find more information about the upcoming couch lessons as well as about the past ones on our website. Yeah, and I hope you will listen to the music of Holly, Ash, and Claire. It's all online on Spotify, I guess. And yeah, it was really, really a pleasure to have you. And thank you all. Bye.